Hello and welcome to the Cancer Rethink, the podcast that challenges the status quo in cancer. My name's Adam Brichto. I've got the great pleasure of having my co-host here, Suva. You just say hello, Suva.
Hello.
And today our guest is none other than Professor Mustafa Djamgoz, a man whose name is known across the world of cancer research. And Suva, I believe that you guys know each other pretty well.
You're not wrong, Adam. I've known Mustafa for, I think, close to 7 months now. When I first got interested in the world of cancer bioelectricity, I sent an email to him on a Sunday evening at about 8 or 9 p.m. I was amazed to get a reply from him a couple of hours later, before midnight. And yeah, pretty soon after that, we started collaborating and things have been going great.
So in this episode, we're going to learn about some of the fascinating research that you are doing together. Mostly I'm going to be asking Mustafa the questions, but Suva, I think you're going to be chipping in as well with some of your own insights too.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'll just say about me, my great skill is that I am a complete non-expert. So be warned, I might ask some very stupid questions. But the best place to start, I believe, is to start with this concept, which I understand has been going around for many, many years, many decades, in fact, the war on cancer. Mustafa, what is the war on cancer?
Well, the war on cancer was a slogan presented by President Richard Nixon in the 70s, starting a war on cancer, a way of beating cancer, managing cancer through all possible ways of doing so. That went on. Billions of dollars were poured into this venture. And then it sort of fizzled away. And then when Joe Biden became president, and he, of course, sadly, he lost a son to cancer. So he set up a comparable program, which he called Moonshot, Cancer Moonshot, because Americans had succeeded to go to the moon, and the implication was that we could equally go to curing cancer. That's a term that I don't like to use, cure. We can talk about that later. And there have been similar sort of slogans coming from different organizations, different walks of life. Currently, for example, the Cancer Research UK has a mega program, which they're calling, in collaboration with their other bodies, called Grand Challenges in Cancer, identifying 6 areas worth investing in, one of which relates to the kind of subjects we will cover today. And these 6 projects each will receive up to $25 million. So again, a mega attempt at cancer, at understanding cancer and knowing what to do with it, really.
And you don't have to be an expert to know that we haven't won the war on cancer. But how far would you say we have come towards winning the war?
Well, I mean, the cancer war, if that is the right term, the right description, that was Richard Nixon who put that forward, is an ongoing war. I don't know in history where there are or have been wars, or there are wars now that will never end, sort of thing. You can think of one or two. So there's no doubt that progress has been made, but the problem hasn't gone away. So I don't want to say we've lost the war on cancer, but we haven't yet got to the desirable point in time of being able to manage cancer and live with it effectively.
So pretty much the term war on cancer probably is not the best term that we could be using. Is there a better analogy we could be using?
Well, presidents and organizations invent these terms, these slogans to attract attention, behind which, of course, is money raising, the economic aspect, and so on. My favorite way of looking at cancer now, in a battle sense or in a war sense, is how to live with cancer in the 21st century. That is how I would describe where we are and what we are trying to do. Now, but that will mean, in trying to get to know how to live with cancer, we will have to fight. So there will be a war, because cancer is a terrible disease, and they need to be fought.
Yeah, I mean, I think another analogy that might be quite useful in how we think about cancer or rethink it might be something along the lines of trying to restore the Society of Cells. The Society of Cells actually was a book written by a couple of eminent biologists at Tufts University, Anna Soto and Carla Sonnenschein, in 1999. And so rather than just killing cancer cells, in which there's a lot of collateral damage, healthy cells get killed as well, hence the side effects, the terrible side effects of chemotherapy. What if we could envision a sort of gentler approach where we sort of, quote unquote, rehabilitate cancer cells and gently coax them back into the harmonious society of cells? So anyway, I quite like that analogy.
I think you're spot on there, Suva. Thank you for bringing that up. I know the book very well. And yes, like any other war in the heads of a sensible person, you would want peace and you would want resolution without, damage to the communities involved, and the loss of life, but also loss of other resources and so on. And there is that element in cancer. It is a society of cells. I mean, tumor, we think, is just one lump of cancer cells. It's not. There are lots of different cell types in there, all generating this aggressiveness that cancer can have. Not all cancers are aggressive. And one portion of that society, one part of that society, are the so-called stem cells. Now, stem cells, everybody will know, are those cells that are capable of becoming any other cell. So think of it as an embryo. So we start life with an egg cell from our mother and a sperm from our father. The egg gets fertilizes, and then starts dividing. So that one fertilized egg becomes 2, then 4, and 8, and 16, and 32, 64. It goes on, and from those 64 cells, or 128, the rest of the body is made. So we make all our nerves, all our muscle, our heart, our brain, our legs, our nails, our hair, and they are stem cells. And cancer has this property of being able to become anything, which means that if we don't treat the tumor properly, we can actually promote the stemness. And this has now been seen because what used to be maximum tolerable chemotherapy, aiming to kill the tumor, cancer cells, unfortunately, whilst almost killing the patient, is now being revised. And we have a whole new approach called metronomic therapy, which basically means give patients the least chemotherapy. Do not mess about with those stem cells. Do not get them to wake up and change character and start misbehaving and disrupting their surroundings. Yes, I think the analogy is good. We do indeed have a society of cells to deal with.
So I think, being honest, some of this would have gone over my head a few months ago before I became a bit more engaged in what cancer was all about. About the basic tenets of how cancer works. So just to make sure that we keep our audience with us, I've heard along the way that one way of looking at cancerous cells is that they are cells that have gone rogue, and actually that the issue with having a war on cancer, a war on those cells, is that if you do chemotherapy and you kill those cells, you're also killing other vital parts of the infrastructure of our bodies as well. Is that true?
That's it. And I think, a man in the street will know that because cancer is so common now. We can talk a little bit about the scale of the problem or the statistics. That's everybody will know somebody with cancer, and everybody will know somebody who's had cancer treatment. With chemotherapy, how one loses one's hair and the intestines, the guts go into high inflammation because that is also one of the areas affected. But listen, you said earlier that you are the most naive of the three here. So don't be shy about asking for clarification of anything that we might say. I hope I got the message about stem cells across.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's then, obviously, we're talking about the scale here a little bit. Can you give us a little, everyone, as you say, knows someone that has had an experience with cancer. So can you give us a scale of the problem now and what the future projection looks like as well? Is it getting better or is it getting worse?
I think I do have some numbers up my sleeve. I like to get all my facts right. So I'm going to compare the statistics from 2022, so that's about 3 years ago, and projection to 2040, so a 15-year expectation. The number of diagnoses is expected to go from 20 million as it was to 28 million. Number of people diagnosed with cancer.
That's globally?
Worldwide, right?
That's about a 40% increase.
That doesn't sound like a lot to me.
That's a global figure, right?
This is a global figure.
Out of 8 billion people, 28 million doesn't sound like that much.
Out of
8 billion?
But these are the diagnoses. This is what the WHO, World Health Organization.
So there's inevitably going to be many more millions who go undiagnosed as well.
So cancer-associated deaths will double from 8 million to 16 million. So that means within our lifetime or within the current generation, we will see the cancer problem increase more or less leading up to doubling. So this is what I meant earlier when I said this problem is not going to go away, whether we had the war on cancer or the moonshot or whatever.
So I guess that's why it makes sense that we're calling the show The Cancer Rethink, and that now is the time for us to rethink how we do tackle cancer. So what aspects of the cancer puzzle would benefit most from a complete rethink?
The answer to that is very simple and clear. It is to stop the spreading of cancer. That is the big problem. Tumors, localized tumors, doesn't matter where they are, even within your brain, within your lung, or within your prostate or somewhere, breast, as long as they don't grow and disrupt their surroundings beyond a certain point, one can live with them as they are or surgically get rid of them. The problem starts, the real problem, the boy becomes man when cancer spreads, a process that is called metastasis. And that is what I work on, because if we can control or stop the cancer cells from spreading, we can live with cancer. Just like we can live with all sorts of little lumps in our bodies and little beauty marks and so on.
I mean, just to add to, just to connect kind of, I think, the last two sort of questions that we've touched on. There's an interesting connection between the worldwide problem of cancer and perhaps how we rethink it, because as Mustafa knows very well, there's an interesting patterns of prevalence of different types of cancers across different parts of the world. Say first world versus third world cancers, if you like, which was nicely highlighted by Mustafa in the book, in your book, Beat Cancer, which you wrote with the late Professor Jane Plant. And so I think this strongly suggests a connection between lifestyle factors, most notably diet and environmental factors, and the chance of developing cancer. And I think this should be definitely better known by the general public at large, and that's definitely one of the reasons we're doing we're doing this podcast.
I think we'll deal with dietary aspects later in this series, probably. But you're absolutely right. The best evidence in research, I mean, we do experiments day in, day out. We get data, we analyze them, we do the statistics, we write papers, send to journals. Papers go out to external review by experts, and if they accept, then our studies get published. The best evidence is epidemiological. In other words, looking around the world and saying, look, who gets cancer the most? Smokers get lung cancer the most. I mean, Sir Richard Dole, and we've just been to a conference in the building at Oxford named after him, is the person who, he did the simplest possible science. He looked at 10,000 people who did not smoke, and 10,000 people, I'm just inventing the numbers, who were smokers, and then blow me, these smokers turned out to get more, statistically significantly more lung cancer. And that was it. Now we look at diet around the world, and there's no doubt that there are in the sort of Western diet, the so-called cancers of affluence, which are things like breast, prostate. These are hormone-sensitive cancers, hormones being chemicals in our body, which ultimately come from food. And then other cancers, more related to lesser developed countries where diet may not be so good. And what do they have? They have more stomach cancer and colon cancer and things like that. So we get a pretty good idea of the importance of diet and environment from lifestyle, including diet.
Okay. So I think without further ado, we should get on to the nitty gritty of what we're going to be talking about, which is your line of research. And from what we were saying before, where we're not tackling cancer as well as we could with things like chemotherapy, and there seems to have been a bit of an over-reliance maybe on chemotherapy. Is that right?
Well, I think the over-reliance is on cell killing. You know, your average oncologist, your average clinician, the way they treat cancer is to try and get rid of it by surgery, which is actually a very good way if done properly, or by some way of killing the cells, for example, with chemotherapy or radiotherapy or some targeted therapies. All across the board, you're trying to get rid of the cancer out of your body. What I have been advocating for several years is the notion of living with the cancer, just like we can live with diabetes and other chronic diseases. And AIDS is now probably the best example how HIV, the human immunodeficiency virus, can be controlled so it doesn't give rise to AIDS. And that means AIDS has become a chronic disease.
I just wanted to share an interesting observation, which is, Mustafa, you've talked quite eloquently about how we should reframe our treatment of cancer as viewing it as a chronic disease. You're probably aware that Mel Greaves, Professor Mel Greaves, the founding director of the Center of I think Evolution and Cancer at the Institute of Cancer Research, he was ridiculed, I think, in 2013 or 14 by parts of the UK press for suggesting that we should transform how we think of cancer as seeing as a chronic disease, especially in older patients. And I find that very interesting that he was ridiculed because I think it says something very very interesting about societal and cultural expectations that are built up about what we can expect to achieve in the cancer puzzle, right? I think the expectation is built up that, oh, this is a war, and given enough time, we're obviously just going to develop enough sort of powerful weapons eventually to win the war. So I just think it's quite interesting. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Put it very politely as interesting. I think it's verging on cruel. If a serious scientist comes along with evidence and puts a new concept on the table, and it doesn't happen to fit the consensus opinion at the time, and you get ridiculed, I mean, that is That is not just impolite, that's cruel. I lived through the same process myself.
So this leads us nicely to talking about how you have come up with new stuff. So from what I understand, you started off in a more conventional route. You got a PhD in biophysics. You became a professor of neurobiology. And then about 30 years ago, you suddenly went off script and became interested in cancer, eventually getting a second professorship in cancer biology. So just intrigued to know, how did that come about?
Okay. I have always been interested in the body's electricity, electrical properties. And that goes back to my teens when I built, this is a well-known story in the field, but forgive me for repeating it. It goes back to, it goes back to the fact that as a teenager, I built a radio transmitter when I was growing up in Cyprus, where I was born, and had electric shock several times whilst building this kit, naked on my desk. And I was fascinated by this phenomenon. Why does this electric shock gives you such a thrill, or it threatens to kill you? It's a cross between a thrill and a thunderbolt going through your body. And after several times, I was fascinated, absolutely fascinated. I still am. I said, I'm gonna make this my career, studying the bodies. Why is the body so electric?
Let me get this right. You were giving yourself electric shock treatment.
No, not giving myself electric shock treatment. I'll come to that separately. No, I was building a radio transmitter, which obviously had to be connected to the mains at times. And the more the kit got put together, we had to test various things. Is the current coming, or is the voltage right, and so on. So that everything was live, naked electricity, and I was, pottering about amongst the components. I wasn't. But
you weren't getting a thrill.
No. I wasn't purposefully giving myself. I mean, I was a little bit naive, but not that naive. But what I did say anecdotally, some years later, after I became a professor or academic and had my own lab, and I started getting research students come and work with me, I did go through a very short phase of saying, look, if you want to understand what bioelectricity is, or what the body's electrical properties are, before you start working with me, you got to go and put your finger in the electric socket. And then you'll know what you're up against. This didn't go down very well, so we soon forgot that.
Surely can't have been approved by health and safety.
Because I know actually that, this is not what we plan to talk about, but I do know that in the field of mental health over the years, it was a big thing to use electric shock treatment for bipolar, wasn't it?
Still used, but it's now been refined more. And we know much better to focus the electric shock or the stimulus to get the desirable effect.
So
it does work. But it can also be blunt instrument. So you've got to know how to put it to proper use.
So for me, it kind of blows my mind, the idea of using electricity to help with cancer.
Okay, so let me complete career progression. So the natural subject matter for me to study was physics. So I did that at Imperial College, and then it was one of the best educations I had. Because physics, I felt, and Suva studied physics as well. I was a practical physicist.
Not at the same time as you, Mustafa, but yes, we did both study at Imperial.
I wasn't referring to the time element. I'm referring to the fact that I was a practical physicist and he is a theoretical physicist. Yeah. He doesn't know how to do an experiment, but I do.
No idea.
So I studied physics and I enjoyed it tremendously. It was enormously satisfying. Physics taught me everything in the universe post the Big Bang. No one knows who pressed the button, but after the Big Bang, physics can tell you how the planets formed, black holes, stars, gravitational forces, the whole jamboree. So I felt, this is good. I now understand the world, the physical world I live in. But I wasn't satisfied.
Can I say it felt electric?
It was electrifying, yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So when I got the opportunity to do a PhD, I jumped to it. And now that was in biophysics. Life sciences or biology was beginning, this is now late 70s, was beginning to come into physical sciences. Physicists started thinking about biology. Engineers started thinking about, how mechanical engineers, how can we make a prosthetic arm or something that can be used medically and so on. And this was a growth industry. And I was involved in the battles at Imperial College when we had our first merger with a medical school, which was St. Mary's. Because, the big engineers didn't want medicine and life sciences and things like that. And we won that battle. It was obvious that we would win it because that was the trend in the field. Physics had its beautiful golden era in the second part of in the first part of the 20th century. With relativity and quantum mechanics and uncertainty. So Einstein and Heisenberg and Planck and all these people, every lab got a Nobel Prize because of the fundamental discoveries. And then time came to life sciences. Now we needed such progress in understanding life or the life's processes. So the balance turned towards life sciences, and physicists and engineers started getting involved. Medicine, obviously. And so the natural place for me to do my PhD was in neuroscience, neurobiology. And I worked on brain cells, studying electrical signals. And I learned a lot about electrical signals being generated naturally by neurons. But most importantly, this was in the sort of early 80s. This was a time of plasticity in the brain, how the brain changes during its normal functioning, during development, under the influence of external factors and so on. And so I spent 25 years working on retinal neurons. And that was like... the brain reminded me, the retina was my model of the brain. It's very important in research to use the right model to answer the question you're trying to find answers to. So the retina is a beautiful neural layer which you can isolate from the eye and then use it with microelectrodes to detect the signals from the nerve cells therein. And so that was like neurobiology, or the brain, broadly speaking, to me seemed like a biological universe. It really is. It's so complex. So, but I felt at home. I thought, I understand the physical universe. Now I can use my expertise to try and understand this biological universe. So I spent 25 years doing that, and then also learning a lot about the capacity of cells to change. That was physiological. And then I became a professor, and then curiosity led me to question if cancer cells, because I got to believing, as I do now, everything in life is, well, every cell is electric. It's all electricity, damn it. So, cancer cells, do they generate electrical signals? Of course they do, because every cell in the body of all the trillions of cells we have are electric, one by one. They all have electricity. So that led to a second career in which I, for the first time, questioned if the electrical activities of aggressive cancer cells, metastatic cells, cancer cells capable of spreading, the issue we touched on before, and cancer cells that are benign, they just sit there forever. Do they differ in their electrical activities?
So was there like a eureka moment where you thought, okay, I've got this knowledge of electricity, you've got an awareness of cancer, that actually electricity could be used to do great things with cancer?
Well, the eureka moment...
Didn't the spark actually come from a pub session, if I recall correctly?
Well, I think Sally Addy, in her famous book on Our Body is Electric, used that anecdote. Yes,
but I mean, you can set the record straight. Well, that's not strictly.
I'm sure alcohol can help with electric moments as well.
let's not go there. So the eureka moment, which is important, is so we got these cells. We started with prostate cancer. Now this is now 80s, nudging into 90s, and we, the community, the people, were becoming aware of this thing called prostate. Because, you know, traditionally men died with it. You didn't know prostate cancer.
I know quite a lot about it because I've got a gene, a BRCA gene, which means I'm more likely to get prostate cancer.
Possibly, God forbid. So, I mean, I gave talks, public talks, and little ladies would ask me, well, where is mine then? I said, well, you don't have to worry. This is a man's problem. So we took out prostate cancer cells, two cell types, one strongly metastatic, aggressive, and the other one very poorly metastatic, aggressive.
So I don't even know what metastatic means. Sorry.
Metastatic is the capacity to spread. I thought I defined it earlier, but I think it's no. So metastasis is the term for the spreading of cancer, and when cancer spreads, sometimes we call it metastatic disease.
And that's the thing that kills 90% of
which is the main cause of death.
Of the patients, yeah.
Right. Suva is absolutely right. More than 90% of deaths from cancer is due to metastasis or metastatic disease. So the eureka moment came. We took these cells, rat prostate, put the electrode in, did the stimulation, and blow me, we found this sodium current. And I'm going to be just a wee bit technical now, because this current, this signal, is only found in the body's so-called excitable cells like nerve cells and muscles. But this was not a nerve or a muscle. This was prostate tissue, which had become neuronal. It was beginning to fire this electrical activity. So I immediately formed the idea that what was causing cancer aggressiveness was this excitation, was the expression of this gene and the protein it generated, which ultimately led to the cells becoming electrically excited. Which I then called CELEX model. CELEX for cellular excitability.
And just going back to, so that was a kind of like an epiphany moment, but at that point you'd already thought, okay, this could work. Was there a point before that where you thought, actually, let's test the electricity? What happens with the electricity of cancer cells?
Well, I know what you're pushing me into. We haven't given people electric shocks or put batteries up there, but as parts of their body to see if what happens. That may come one day, and I do have ideas about those as well.
But I'm guessing that basically when you came up with the idea, let's use electricity to see if we can come up with some interesting ways of treating cancer, you were pretty much the only person looking at it at the time. So there must have been a point where you go, actually, let's give this a whirl. Let's see if we can do something with electricity.
It wasn't just my sense of curiosity. The cancer was sitting there as a big, big problem. The oncologists were still giving the chemo, doing the radiation. Surgeons reckon, I can cure it. So the problem wasn't disappearing. It needed a new way of thinking. It needed thinking outside the box, to use an expression. And when I came into the cancer field, I parachuted in. I knew nothing about cancer. I knew a lot about brain. Yeah. I knew about complex systems. I just parachuted into this field. I said, what do I do? How do I investigate cancer? Well, I know how to investigate, how to detect electrical signals. Let's start with my expertise. The rest is history.
So that cruelty that you used to describe the recent professor that said this is it shouldn't be treated as a chronic illness. Did you experience some of that cruelty as well at the time?
A lot, because I felt I mean, even if I say so, I believe day one that the phenomenon we had discovered, this excitability, was going to go all the way into the clinic because we knew how to block it. We had drugs for it and so on. So I started pushing it top down, saying this is it. In fact, the Sunday Times published a half-page article on our research when we replicated the results on prostate on human cells. It was a big write-up. And they actually said, because we're using the toxin of the pufferfish to block this current as a tool, it's a research tool to identify the nature of the signal. Sunday Times turned it around and said, pufferfish, solution to prostate cancer sort of thing. It was beautifully written. by Steve Connor, the journalist at the time. So then I get all my papers started being rejected. All my grant applications were rejected, and people, first of all, people say, it's an epiphenomenon. So cancer goes through this change, and these signals just fall off the side, sort of thing. But it wasn't an epiphenomenon, because by blocking the signals, we could change the cancer cell's behavior. By the way, moving into the cancer field was experiencing another universe. This time a pathological universe. Cancer is a pathological universe. So I lived through this progression in my thinking from trying to understand the physical universe, biological universe, and then pathological universe, all dealing with complex systems. And one of the things that we're talking with Suva at the moment is how to model these complexities mathematically, because that's very important to do the maths. Not everyone can do that. That's why I responded to him that evening, because I knew what he could do, that we and others need it done.
I hear about this modelling a lot. I know quite a few scientists, and they talk about spending spending half of their time modelling. It doesn't mean anything to me. So I'm just curious.
I'll explain to you. First of all, it can mean a number of things. First of all, there is the need to use model systems to investigate certain phenomena. Okay? So if you ask the question, how do nerves conduct electricity? How do nerves conduct those spikes that you see on TV screens, in television programs and so on? When you ask that question, you obviously need a nerve that's easy to investigate, to record from, put electrodes on, first of all, have access to, and things like that. You couldn't do that on a human. You couldn't do that in a mammal or some higher animal. You know the model that was used for that? It was the giant nerve of the squid.
Right.
You know how squid and its tentacles, how powerful they are. That's a 1 millimeter nerve. And the guys who did it were Alan Hodgkin and Andrew Huxley, Nobel Prize. They did that squid giant axon, giant nerve, enabled them to do the experiments. Once they formed once they understood the conduction process, the excitation and conduction, they could then go and test whether the same thing was happening in humans or in more difficult systems. Do you see what I mean? So you use the model system to understand or to discover a phenomenon in a model setting, and then go and see if the same happens in a more complicated situation. Now, the other type of model is what Suva is doing, which is to take a phenomenon and explain it mathematically. Now, classically, and I live this, biologists, were not quantitative. Biologists were used to, holding cuddly animals and watching birds and things like that. Now, biologists are obliged to do the maths, to do the statistics. We study populations. There's a climate crisis, or there's a population crisis around the world. We need to know the numbers, the trends, ecology. So he's the expert who can do that.
Yeah, for me, phenomenal, the idea that electricity could have a role in the world of cancer. So I know that it's known as a genetic disorder, relating so things like gene mutations, for example. But how does electricity fit in with all of that?
Well, electricity, or the body's electricity, or bioelectricity, is a set of signals, a language the cells use, and unless you listen in properly with the right, earphones, you wouldn't hear it. So a lot of emphasis has been on the genetic basis. Remember, again, the 50s and 60s had this structured DNA determined. So everything became molecular, including the disease. Now, and then you look at the genes and say, there's a mutation here. The gene is a little bit different in cancer, and that may or may not be inherited. And of course, some cancers are hereditary and so on. So this became quite a I don't want to say dogma. It became the emphasis in the field. Cancer is all to do with genes. In fact, everything is to do with genes. But in fact, cancer is not primarily a genetic disease. It is an epigenetic disease. And I'll explain that to you. I think this is something that everybody should know beyond our main topic today.
I should know this. I need to know this. What is an epigenetic disease?
we are born with 22,000 genes. Okay, this is much less than it was thought. The expectation was we had about 200,000 genes, 10 times more. But when the Human Genome Project was completed, it came up with many fewer genes than expected, 22,000 genes. But these 22,000 were only 1 or 2% of the whole genome, of the whole genetic material that our cells, our bodies carry. So what does the other 99% do? We didn't know for a long time. And people called it junk DNA. Some people called it dark DNA because we didn't know. In fact, we now know that 99% actually manages the 1%. So those 22,000 genes are under constant modulation, up and down, expression somewhere and not. And the problem with cancer is that, for example, the gene that we discovered, the protein, this sodium channel protein that we discovered, turns up, it's a normal protein, it's a normal gene, but it turns up in the wrong place because there is no place for it in your breast or in your prostate or in your lung. But because of the pathological change, it is expressed and then disturbs this is what we call the homeostasis, the balance, the normal balanced functioning of that part of the body, and ultimately leading to cancer.
Sounds like a healthier society where you've got 99% controlling the 1%, rather than the world we're in where it feels like the other way around.
This is what the Times magazine called on its front page, we are no longer the destiny of our genes.
Right.
Okay? Because we can change our genetic structure. So the epigenetics means we can change those primary genes, let's call them 22,000, and then live differently. And they respond, this phenomenon, this epigenetics, responds to diet, lifestyle, social well-being, like we're doing today, good social interaction.
Yeah.
Okay, and so we are not the destiny of our genes. You're not the destiny of what your parents gave you. You can adjust that a lot, like an adjustable resistor, and then change yourself all the time.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to, how electricity or bioelectricity fits in with genes or genetic notions or aspects of cancer. So, bioelectric interventions, and by that what I mean is, if we change the flow of electric currents in or out of cells, and there's various ways of doing that, as you've touched on, Mustafa. Drugs, some drugs can do that by blocking certain ion channels and so on and so forth. It's very interesting that they've been revealing that. So this bioelectrical intervention has been revealing itself to be a very powerful kind of master regulator or influencer of over how genes turn on and off, as you were explaining.
I mean, you can absolutely, without changing the genetic structure of a species or of an animal, you can change its physiological state through just bioelectric signaling.
Yeah, so this is a kind of top-down control that bioelectricity offers over our genes, and it's not that this means that genes are any less important.
I mean, we can say that,
but okay. I mean, that's another debate for another time. But for me, the most important lesson I take away from it is that bioelectricity offers up a new way of thinking, a new space of possibilities.
If you look at the history of science, and I'm old enough to have lived some of the history, greatest discoveries come when people change fields or introduce new techniques into an existing field. So Crick and Watson discovered the structure of DNA. How? By using X-ray diffraction. Yeah. So it was really, of course, then they had to do the interpretation of the diffraction pattern, but it was the instrument that gave them the raw material. And like the MRI machine, clinical imaging, that enables you to do the diagnosis image the body at a level of detail that's not otherwise possible. So, and bioelectricity is part of the world of cells. We talked about the society of cells. It's a language that cells use to communicate with each other and communicate with the rest of the world. I think maybe we should explain what is bioelectricity, how it comes about, because I talked about this at that eureka moment, how we discovered this protein, this signal, which is basically which didn't.
Should I just ask shall I just say? Just to help out some of the listeners who might be being lost along the way. What actually is bioelectricity?
Okay, bioelectricity is biological electricity. Electricity is flow of charges. It's very, very simple. So you can either have it by electrons, which are negatively charged, moving, or ions, like cations and anions, moving. So when a charge moves, it generates a current. That is how we get electricity. And if that current goes across a resistor, you get a voltage, defined by Ohm's law. So now, so what we discovered, I'll just use that example, what happens. So we discovered a protein and its signal. The protein is a sodium channel. So this is a protein. All proteins are ultimately made by genes. So we come back to our 22,000 genes. So one gene, particular gene, makes this protein and puts it in the cell membrane. Now, it's a protein, it's got a big protein with a hole in the middle. And the hole permeates only sodium. Now, what is sodium? Sodium comes from salt. What is salt? Salt is sodium chloride. Yeah, I think we know that from secondary school.
I think I forgot that.
Okay, you may have forgotten, but salt is sodium chloride. Yeah. And when you dissolve it, when you put your white powder in water, it dissolves, and sodium and chloride separate. So you have sodium, which is a plus, carries a positive charge, and chloride, which is a negative charge. Together, when they combine, they make the compound salt. Now, in our bodies, we have these salts. So I understand. But I mean, our blood, for example, is a salty solution, salty medium. Have you never? Yeah. I was going to say, I mean, you must have licked the odd wound or cut at some point.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it has that saltiness, put loosely. So what happens in the case of our protein and in many other instances is the sodium in our blood or in our body fluids will go through the protein, and as it does so, it generates a current. And as the current flows, it generates a voltage. And then that's how we see the signal. So the signal, that's bioelectricity, the flow of the current. Now, why does sodium go in? Because there is much less sodium in the cell than in our blood outside. So as soon as the gateway is open, naturally, sodium ions flow downhill from high to low concentration. And in doing so, they will generate a current. Then we've got electricity. Current means voltage, electricity.
So shall we get to so with all of this, what is the thing that is exciting you most about your research right now?
Well, I think what's exciting us is the reality now of we've got to a point of understanding. I don't want to say better because I'm respectful of my colleagues, but we have generated a new vision of the cancer process in which all these electrical signals are buzzing away, driving cancer cells to divide or to spread and so on. And what we now want to do is to focus on the bioelectricity, these bioelectric signals, and then stop the cancer from spreading. And this has been shown in animal models again. So, for example, there's an experiment done in France. It's always nice when other people do experiments that support you. If I just kept supporting myself, it'll be, self-perpetuating, as it were. So the French...
It's less cruel, isn't it, than basically having you...
Yeah. So what the French guys did, they took the cells with this gene in, this sodium channel gene, the gene that makes the sodium channel protein, and they silenced it. There's a way of turning the gene off. This is the kind of gene therapy. and then put it into a mouse. A lot of experiments, these experiments are done on mice. What happened? Whilst in normal cells would spread within the body and go to lungs and things within a few weeks, once this gene was silenced, turned off, no spreading occurred. So that proved that the protein, this channel and its signal were driving this spreading process. Now we know how to block this protein. We can block it with various drugs or with an antibody that we have also made. Now we're getting into the clinical area. So the research has, what excites me now is converting these fundamental discoveries to clinical reality. And it's going to happen. I'm absolutely confident that it will happen. And that's the excitement.
So if we can, basically from what I'm getting, if we can turn off a gene by in a mouse with in this sort of like in this isolated way, then the potential is enormous. Is that right?
Now, what we need to do is to get rid of this protein or its activity. Now, if you want to get rid of it, you do it genetically. So you do some gene therapy, and that gene is turned off, so the protein disappears. That's not trivial. Or we can eliminate the protein's functioning by blocking it with a drug. Right. Okay? So the protein doesn't disappear, but that sodium cannot go through anymore. So the whole thing is frozen. And we have access to such drugs. The good news here is the kinds of drugs that block this protein are local anesthetics, antiarrhythmics, anti-epileptics, nothing to do with chemotherapy. Yeah. So nothing to do with cell killing. We are freezing the cancer, stopping the spreading, and achieve our aim of living with it, ultimately.
This is going to sound so random, but the whole concept of seeing us as electric beings has just hit me, because every now and again I get an experience which is where I sort of like feel a bit funny, and it feels like I can hear an electric current in my head. It's kind of like a slight unbalancing. I don't know if anyone else has ever experienced that. And now I'm seeing things in a different way. That, okay, it doesn't seem so strange that from a very layman's perspective that electricity could have a very strong effect in actually how our bodies work, and therefore.
Well, possibly the most obvious way of seeing the impact of bioelectricity on the body is in epilepsy. Yeah. And what happens in epilepsy is the brain that you described goes into hyperactivity, a seizure, and the body loses control. I mean, I've seen epileptic patients, like on the floor, but they go into convulsions and actually can kill themselves if they're not careful. So that is it. That is a very similar analogy to our discoveries. So what we see in these aggressive cancers is that kind of hyperactivity, pushing the cells out of control. What Suva said earlier on about disturbing that society, disturbing the balance, getting those neighbors to attack you rather than live happily with you.
For fear of mentioning this, but I'm going to mention it because it was something that interested me, and which Suva mentioned, which is I've understood that also with frogs there is this possibility that you could use electricity to. Am I right in saying this? Put eyes on the behind of a frog. Has that happened? Is that because that just sounds a bit wild? You can.
Suva can answer that.
Yeah, so getting back to what we were discussing a few minutes ago, I guess, about sort of how bioelectricity sort of ties in, or kind of how it's related to genes and gene expression. Bioelectricity opens up a new way, or a new space of possibilities by exerting this kind of master influence, this kind of powerful top-down control over genes. And I think what you're getting at, Adam, is stuff that's been most notably demonstrated by Michael Levin's lab at Tufts University, where in the context of developmental biology and regeneration, they've shown that just with bioelectric interventions, they can generate eyes in places of certain species where you would think eyes have no place of being there ordinarily. So, like on the backs of frogs, and some of our listeners might be wondering, well, what the heck has this got to do with cancer? And the point is that it shows conceptually it shows the power of bioelectricity. You know, it just tells us something very important about the space of possibilities. What might be possible with bioelectric interventions. So, you know, going back to cancer, it opens up the possibility of us thinking about reprogramming cancer. You know, this whole idea of rehabilitating cancer cells rather than just nuking them. This is something we can entertain now with this bioelectric intervention. So yeah, that's the connection there.
And ultimately, from what I'm gathering, is like the aim here is turning certain elements of certain cells off rather than destroying them. Basically, the idea is you just sort of like you're not. It's trying to create some kind of harmonious society within the body, and if there are ways of doing that with electrical switches, currents, that's gonna that in the long run is going to be an amazing game changer in the way that cancer is treated, and maybe a lot less intrusive for. I mean, I hear a lot of people. Well, we see a lot of people that have terrible experiences going through chemotherapy, and I'm guessing that ultimately, in the ideal world that you are seeing in the next few years, that you might have a big part to play in changing how that works.
You know, to reiterate what Mustafa was saying, it's really important to stress that the insights that he and his collaborators have found over you know the last couple of decades, which tells us that it's possible to treat. To view cancer as a chronic disease. We can use drugs, many of which already exist, drugs that are used for epilepsy and various cardiovascular and neuronal diseases. Many of these drugs are out there, and we can repurpose some of these things to, as Mustafa said, we can use them to specifically block the activity of certain ion channels, which alters the electrical signaling. It kind of dampens the electrical activity or aggressiveness of cancer cells. And that means patients can just take this on an ongoing basis and live with the disease, which is really, and it's so important to stress that this is a non-toxic approach. This does not involve killing cells, so there's no collateral damage here. Right, Mustafa?
Absolutely. And I mean, let's also acknowledge two facts. One, that any longer a cancer patient lives, whether through bioelectricity or otherwise, the more chance they will have to live longer, because things are happening all the time, including in the hands of people like us. The other point I think we should acknowledge is it's not, of course, everybody wants therapy. Everybody wants to treat cancer. Everybody wants to get rid of cancer. But it is also important, if not equally important, to diagnose cancer properly and early, because early diagnosis does actually save lives. Early diagnosis increases the chance of successful surgery, and that could be almost the best way of dealing with cancer today. Detect it early and cut it out without any damage, any disruption to the surroundings, like
metastasis.
Well, that's right. I mean, the surgeon must. I was speaking to a patient yesterday, and she's going through various treatments, and the surgeon has started talking about possible surgery. And I said, look, be careful, and I will be happy to talk to the surgeon, not tell him what to do, but bring out the fact that by doing the wrong kind of surgery at the wrong time, you can make cancer worse. You can actually waken up some of those hibernating cancer cells and increase the problem. So you've got to know what you're doing. We are up against a very clever beast, the bottom line. So I think we should acknowledge the potential application of bioelectricity in diagnosis. And diagnosis, you think you can walk into an average pathology lab or clinic and have your suspected tumor diagnosed properly? No. Prostate is an example. PSA, which is used very commonly, we hear it all the time, gets it right about 25% of the time probably. The rest of the time it underestimates or overestimates. Yeah. And men have sleepless nights. Mammograms get it wrong and about 30% of the surgeries are unnecessary over a surgical intervention. But if we diagnose it properly, then the follow-on treatment can be more effective. So what we're now saying is, say imagine a melanoma, the easiest example. If a melanoma, you put an electrode on it, and it is buzzing with electricity, which is what we've seen in our experiments, that means that cancer will spread. If it is excited, it's going to spread, or is already spreading. Then the surgeon can decide how deep to cut it out or how to treat and so on. So effective diagnosis, including early diagnosis, also important in cancer management.
I guess to finish, what makes most sense to me is to ask, what is your best hope then in terms of the timeline for how bioelectricity can be used to make big impacts on cancer?
I would like to think that within the next decade, we will see bioelectricity in the clinic.
What would that look like?
It can take various forms. It could actually look like the wires put around tumors or something, or this novel class of drugs. And Suva touched on repurposing. They could be existing drugs or new drugs that will control this excitation phenomenon and enable people to live with their cancer. And I think that is a distinct possibility. And I think it is not just a distinct possibility, it is actually a necessity. I mean, patients need, this moment in time, they need additional weapons to fight that war with. Going back to the war on cancer.
So it just leads on naturally for me to say, because you're still quite a novelty in the field, I guess you believe that, I mean, that 10 years, that seems to be like quite a short time in the world of cancer research, but I'm assuming it could be brought down if more funds could be directed towards your...
Yes, I think the one thing we learned in the pandemic with the advent of the COVID vaccines is that research pays. Now that the COVID was a mega problem, people were dying like flies, and companies went for it. So companies like BioNTech and others in the States, huge amounts of money went in, both government money, investor money, big pharma money, and the vaccines came out and saved, even though there may be problems with vaccines, we don't need to touch that, but millions of lives were saved. So invest in the right research, you will get results in the right hands.
So I guess for anyone listening out there, if you've got a spare billion or two, then get in touch with Mustafa and Suva.
I mentioned at the beginning, when we started talking about wars on cancer and so on, the CRUK Grand Challenge. One of the 6 grand challenges is in this area. Right. In what is now generally known as cancer neuroscience, to understand the cancer process with neuroscience techniques and concepts, in which, of course, bioelectricity is inherent.
Great. Anything else from you, Suva?
No.
I mean, it has been a pleasure chatting to you, Mustafa. It's been a pleasure chatting with my co-host as well, Suva.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
This has been very electrifying in terms of seeing how I'm going to be looking at cancer. If, lo and behold, I ever get cancer, I'm going to want to come and ask whether there's going to be an electrical cure that's going to save me going through chemotherapy. And I'm sure we're going to explore a lot more interesting issues coming up in the field, in areas such as diagnosis, nutrition. I mean, there's so many different areas we can cover, and I'm looking forward to hopefully getting you back on and discussing more.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.